Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. And if you're new to the channel, I'm Craig Neeson. This is Craig Neeson Photography. Today we will be talking about photographing landscapes in winter. Whew, that wind just kicked up. Whew, it's cold. So one of the main reasons why I was drawn to this composition is the fact that that tree has so much contrast against the frosted trees in the background that have the heavy wet snow attached to them. For some reason, this tree down here stayed warmer and melted that snow, and we have a brown blackish contrast against the white bluff trees. Also, every so often we get a Burlington Northern Santa Fe train through, and they have an orange, yellow, black color scheme on them, so that adds more interest to the photograph in general. So if they turned out, here's a few of those photos right now. One's with the engine and one without.
So here's the photograph of the tree by itself. This is the raw image, of course. There's a little bit less contrast than I would hope for in the raw image. But then again, a raw image is fairly flat, and you do need to bring it back to life in post-processing. Now here's the raw and the post-process side by side. You'll notice that the tree stands out a little bit more. Mainly what I did in here is I just added contrast to the photo. I also removed something that was distracting from the landscape itself that I really didn't want there, but I couldn't find a position in the field to eliminate it and another piece of distracting scenery. I also like how the grasses and the reeds along the creek bed that's next to that tree add a little pop to the photograph. Let me know what you think down below. So here's that photograph of the train that I was talking about. I love how the oranges and that yellow and even the black on the engine pop more. This, of course, is a raw, so it's fairly flat, and it looks pretty good right out of camera. In fact, you can probably see the distraction that I removed in this photograph better than in the raw of the other one. Here's the raw versus the processed image. All I did here is add contrast back into the image. I love how the train actually gives the scene a little bit more sense of place. Shelley also commented that the hint of the houses up above, you may not have noticed it, I didn't notice it until she pointed it out, also gives that sense of place. One last thing on this composition. I was going for motion blur on the engines. I wanted to show motion in the photograph as well. I probably should have slapped on an ND filter to slow it down more. Let me know which one you like better down below in a comment.
Some things to keep in mind when doing winter photography with snow. Your camera's light meter will lie to you, flat out every time. What you might want to do is shoot by your histogram. Make sure that you're not overexposing the whites, which is your snow, or underexposing it. If you overexpose it, you're going to blow out the snow. It's going to ruin the image. If you underexpose it, it's going to look dirty, gray, or muddy, as I like to call it. So those are two things to really keep in mind. So for this subject here, I've selected a river birch that has a light dusting on some of its branches and its trunk. The main contrast that is coming from the river birch is it's multiple shades of reddish brown, and it's peeling bark. The other thing that contrasts against the background is the fact that the background has more frosted branches and undergrowth in the distance there, as well as all the snow on the ground.
So here's that photograph of the river birch. Here again, it's just a tad bit overexposed. Couldn't quite nail it in the field. Sometimes that happens to everybody. I still like the photograph. I like the composition of the photograph. I liked the contrast, even in the raw here, of the tree in the snow. With post-processing, I did bring that exposure down just a tad, not even a quarter of a stop, and I added contrast again. That's pretty much all I did with that photograph. You might also notice a slight blue tinge to the snow in the raw images. That's the color science in the Nikon camera system. Sometimes I'll bring it out, sometimes I like that little bit of blue coolness to the snow.
I'm talking about blowing out your highlights. If you're in Aperture priority mode or in program mode, that is the exposure that the camera believes is correct. See how the histogram is all the way over to the right? That means your whites are gone, totally gone. So if you're going to shoot in aperture priority mode, make sure to use some exposure compensation to bring it down. Get the whites in as well as the blacks. That's not a bad exposure rating right there. This is more my preference. So the first one I showed you was 2 stops underexposed. This is 1 stop underexposed.
So I was really hoping this composition of the marcescent oak tree would turn out a little bit better. I actually took 2 different images of it. This one matches what I was talking about in the field about blowing out your highlights or underexposing the snow. The raw is pretty good. The post is okay. I'm just not really happy with the overall composition. I also took a wider angle shot, which I thought might work cool if I pivoted the lens downward and elongated the tree with a few tracks in the composition itself. Neither one I'm really happy with. Here again, I just added a little contrast in post. Let me know what your thoughts are on this composition and the other 2 that I showed you by leaving a comment down below.
Another tip for shooting in the snow. Treat it like you're shooting at a beach or on a sand dune. Don't make new footprints until you have to. So if people have already been to the location that you're going to shoot in winter with snow, make sure that you stay in defined trails. So if somebody's already been to your location, make sure that you follow that same trail that they've already blazed. Otherwise, what will happen is you're going to inevitably put footprints right where you don't want them in the composition that you finally select. So when I came out here, I know this is a walking trail and I've already seen where everybody's been walking out here. I made sure to stay in that area, in the path that's already been blazed for me. That way I don't put any footprints in the possible compositions that are off the trail that I really want to make. So another thing to take into consideration when doing winter landscape photography, especially when the temperatures start to drop, well, below freezing. 32 for us in the US and 0 for everybody else in the world because we're just different. I am not wearing any summer clothes out here. Yeah, I've got a rain jacket on, but that's my wind shell over multiple layers on my core. I've also got multiple layers on the legs. And I'm wearing winter hiking boots with yak tracks or slip-on spikes. That way I don't take a tumble and land on my expensive backpack, right? So that's another tip. Remember to wear the appropriate stuff because a cold photographer is not a happy photographer. And that means you're probably not going to stay out as long as you need to find the compositions that will make you happy with pushing yourself to get out in the cool, well, the cold, and do a lot of hiking. One of the most important things to keep in mind, other than keeping yourself comfortable while out in the field, is acclimation of your equipment to the cold and then back into the house. Typically what I do is I will throw my gear out in the truck, lock it up for about 20-30 minutes before I head out to a location. And then there's another 10, 15, 20 minutes of drive time at least, a little bit more some days, and then 10 to 15 minutes of hiking around. By that time, my gear should be acclimated fully to being outside, thus not fogging up or frosting up any of the equipment. Last thing to keep in mind when dealing with gear acclimation to temperature change. When you get home, don't rush to get in that bag. Let it sit there on the floor, zipped up. Let it acclimate for 1 to 2 hours. That way you don't cause any damage to the equipment after the fact. And definitely don't jam a cold SD card into a warm computer. That's a quick way to lose your data. Hey, if you made it this far and you enjoyed watching me hike around in the snow and make photos and talk about techniques and tips for winter landscape photography, and you haven't yet done so, please hit that subscribe button down below, ding the bell for future notifications, and if you like this video and what I'm doing for you, give me a big thumbs up. We'll see you next time.